Hi, everybody. Welcome to Spirit Reflections on another episode of Conversations Around the Fire. My name is Fred Govea. And if this is your first time here, Spirit Reflections is an ongoing series of bilingual conversations in English and Portuguese about people's personal and spiritual journeys, tools that they found along the way, and how these tools shaped who they are and the work that they do today. We interview artists, philosophers, scientists, and religious people of all traditions to learn how they came into being and the insights that they discovered along the way. So please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Join us in our mail list on spiritreflections.org. And also check us out on Spotify if you'd like to listen to our podcast instead of just this video format here. And if you have a suggestion for a guest or a topic that you'd like us to address here in the channel, send us an email at info@spiritreflections.org, or you can also go to our website, spiritreflections.org, and there's a contact us link over there where you can send us your suggestions for future topics and future guests. And my guest today here is a good friend, Mark Carlos, and we're going to talk about time and infinite circles. So before I tell you a little bit about Mark and we say hi to him, let's just give a little taste of what today's episode is all about. So, time is probably the most important aspect of everyday life, often misunderstood, and one which is never managed as effectively as we would prefer. Time is also eternal and therefore spiritual in nature. And we all know the importance of history, which is purely time based. Come along and let's ponder the wonders of time and learn about the spiritual significance of time, past, present, and future. And Mark is an American born and bred, having lived his entire life in California, save 1 year when he lived in Hawaii. He was raised Catholic, and he left the church at 16 and was dormant spiritually for almost 30 years, as he says. And then he became a father, and life has not been the same since. Mark found Spiritism in 2018, and he learned enough to realize he's exactly where he's meant to be. A lifetime musician and technologist, Mark is now retired, focused on his spiritual development and still learning how to fly with both wings, the one of knowledge and the one of charity. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Spirit Reflections. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Fred, how you doing, my friend?
Great. How are you? Good to have you here with us again.
Awesome to be here and awesome opportunity to share a bit of this aged mind.
Awesome. Well, let's get to it. Time and its infinite circles. You want to share your presentation now, or just a few words before we
Let's see how
get to
this
the slide?
works.
Okay.
Bingo. So I'm going to explain what infinite circles are
Okay.
graphically, textually, and conceptually. And I'm going to present both spiritual and scientific perspectives, my perspectives, based on
Cool.
research that exists on life, death, and in between life and death. So I call this an infinite circle. And you can think of it in multiple ways. But if you just think of those golden dots, could be people you've met in this lifetime, places you've been in this lifetime, goals and accomplishments from your first steps to high school graduation, to your first job, to driver's license, to whatever. You begin to think of it in terms of what has happened in this life. But when you talk about people you've met, a whole series of things begin to happen. Now, for those of you who are spiritists, there's the principle of reincarnation. So now you think of those golden dots as possibly multiple lifetimes, your multiple lifetimes. Nobody else's, yours. I'm going to explain how that is infinitely possible. During those lifetimes, you could have had multiple spouses and mates. That could be those gold dots. Or they could be children of yours. That could be those gold dots. through all of your lifetimes. Infinitely possible. When did your time begin? Well, let's do some spiritual references. And again, Spiritist literature. In the Spirit's book, number 21, like God, has matter existed for all eternity, or was it created at some fixed point in time? Well, only God knows the answer to that. However, we should think of this as God because the ultimate paradigm of love and charity is never inactive. No matter how far back in time you may imagine the beginning of God's action started. When did God begin the earth? When did God begin humanity? Or the development of humanity? Or when did God participate in the introduction of whatever from whatever other sources to facilitate the development of Earth? Just tons of questions to think about in terms of fixed points in time. But here's the most important thing. Can you deduce that God is or was ever idle? So this is God's nature, never idle, always in action. In Genesis, Kardec talks about the miracles, and he speaks specifically. One can compare the spirits who have come to inhabit the earth to troops of immigrants of diverse origin who came to establish themselves on a virgin soil. They found wood and stone to make habitats, and each one gives to his own a special look or function, according to the degree of his knowledge and ingenuity. They group themselves by reason of affinity, often based on origin, look, or personality. These groups, over time, form tribes, then nations, each having its own customs, characteristics, etc. So we know what God did. This is what humans did. We evolved. We progressed. I love that word. Oh, darn it. Oh, well, so much for a wonderful soundbite. Come on. I can't go backwards, Fred. There we go.
There you go.
So if you know Pink Floyd, you can see the icon of Dark Side of the Moon, which has a wonderful cut of a piece of music that is clocks.
I could share it here on my end if you'd like.
Please play it. It's perfect background to this whole thing. But you can read these three captions and know that I'm going to have a presentation full of those types of captions. Wrong one, but that's okay.
You're right. I'm going to fire my assistant producer here. Hold on a second. Hold on. There we go. And we're going to share the right one this time. Right here. Okay.
There we go. Let it play for like 30 seconds. Okay, so in that little bit of soundbite and in the music that follows, what you begin to understand is time, while we think of it as constant, it really isn't. There are variations. And you're going to see how time and its variations are very present in our everyday life. Okay, more reference material from Happy Life by Devaldo Franco through the Spirit, Joanna DeAngelis. Every day, take the time for silence. It will translate into inner quietude. Listen more than you speak. Think before expressing your opinion. Walk away from commotion, preserving your peace of mind. This is the right approach for every moment of your life. This phrase begins with take the time for silence. Take the time. You realize that puts the power in your hands on how to use time. in this case, for silence. Important principle. In Light Ahead, Chico says, therefore, don't forget that the good is the perfect credit in the book of eternity. Remember that what happens after will always be the result of what we do now. Any time is a good time to renew our destiny. Every moment is an opportunity to start doing our best. Do not leave for tomorrow any good you can do today. Do it today. Imagine if humans lived by that. Okay. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember black and white TV, there was a wonderful TV show that dealt with different dimensions, including time. It was called The Outer Limits. And if you heard the music, it was and so on and so on. So this was perfect background for trying to understand Einstein, unless you're genius level. But Einstein said most humans think they understand what time is. What they understand is what humans have defined, not what time itself is. Time is what clocks measure, man-made clocks, man-made calculations that men decided to call seconds, minutes, hours, days, etc. Time is not constant. It does not pass at exactly the same intervals. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Now look at this one. Time passes slower when you are going faster. Whoa.
Yeah, that messes you up.
Yeah. But here's some facts. And again, we're back to the golden dot in the infinity circle. Only this time it's kind of the sun, and the Earth is going around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
One complete orbit in a year, traveling at 67,000 miles per hour. That's 107 kilometers, 107,000 kilometers per hour. That's how fast the orbit is taking place. And yet it takes 365 days. Now, when you kind of get your head around that and realize the magnitude, or begin to realize the magnitude of that, what you really begin to understand is the starting point of Einstein's theory of relativity, which, if you stand still, you are still moving. It's all relative. The minute I say now, it's history. The second, the nanosecond, I say the word now, it's history. It's not now. We humans can't grasp all that. I don't think we were meant to. But here's a question for everybody. What is time relative to life and death? We think about life expectancy in terms of years, depending on who you are, your genetics, your location, other dynamics and factors, and so on. But the point here is, what is time? So some would answer, it's the time you make of it. And there's other similar types of pondering thoughts, if you will. But look at this. Life is uncharted territory. It reveals its story one moment at a time. So, we kind of live for the future, not the past. So Spiritism teaches us that through multiple incarnations, our lives continue. Again, think of this as your infinite circle, and the lives you've lived are those gold dots. Not the one you're living now. It hasn't appeared in this circle. Or maybe it's kind of superimposed because it's still evolving. It isn't a complete past item. But what we have is a culmination of all these lifetimes in one place, in your infinite circle. It's like its own time capsule. It's a cumulative part of our knowledge, experiences, thoughts, and feelings, which Spiritism teaches us, enables us to progress towards a higher spirit level. Key phrase, enables us, because there's something that has to also happen to actually progress. Our progress includes involvements with other spirits who have their own individual cycles. Fred and I are having a moment of our two individual cycles in cohabitation, if you will, in cyberspace. We're on a similar mission at the moment, depending on how we have spiritually aligned. Okay, remember that. More references from our daily bread. Invitations and advice have more effectiveness when they are accompanied by examples. All those who live practicing the noble principles and display goodness with sincerity are leading their brothers and sisters on an uplifting path. It is this daily testimony of constant practice of inner reform that will free a man from fatal deceit. Key phrase here, remember the importance of the time that is today. Make best use of today. It's a constant theme throughout spiritist literature, because we humans are pretty thick-skinned, thick-headed when it comes to trying to grasp what that means. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to kind of clear your mind of all that I've just said. I won't go back in time. I won't go back to that in the beginning moment. Okay, so from Genesis, in chapter 2, Space and Time. Time is a succession of things. It is bound to eternity in the same manner as things are joined to infinitude. Let us suppose that we are at the beginning of our world, at that primitive epoch where the earth was not held yet in equilibrium by God, by the divine impetus. This is the commencement of Genesis, the beginning of everything. Time has not yet arisen. There is no time yet in terms of how we define it today, how we humans are able to grasp a concept of what we think time is. But it hadn't arisen yet. God hadn't made a reason for time to happen. So at some point, something happened, and nobody knows what happened when he decided to start time. Now, this graphically will hopefully allow you to try to comprehend how much time has passed. But again, in that opening paragraph at the top, think of being there at the beginning, the first hour of a newborn earth, the first night, the first morning. Eternity eternity exists. It's impassive and immobile. And time continues to march in other worlds. But on Earth, we haven't started it yet. This is the beginning. Earth time is now starting. As near as we can tell, 4.5 billion years ago, the beginning of the Earth. Now, that's a man-made scientific conclusion based on consensus and technologies and so on. And some people will refute that and say, no, it's older, or, whatever. Well, let's just say it's 4.5 billion years. First human didn't appear until somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 billion years. That means 3 billion went by. 2 to 3 billion years. Billion years. Billion with the B went by. Now, as I pondered that duration of time before the first human, I began to think about, are we talking about the first human that we now say in this day and age? What about the idea of global cataclysmic floods that wiped out all humanity, which some people point to as there are science proof of something like that occurring? Was that before this? Well, for the purposes of this discussion, to try to understand what is time on this planet, let's just let that slide for now. Let's just say it's somewhere around 2 billion years the first human appeared. It wasn't until 1200 to 1400 BC that Moses lived. So Egyptians were just before that. Not too much before that. 2000, 4000 BC, something like that. And then Jesus is born, hence the BC.
Well, interesting fact, according to Edgar Casey and his mediumistic communications, he asserted through the mediumistic communications that the pyramids were 10 to 12,000 years, were built 10 to 12,000 years BC. And an astronomer decided to then take the map of the stars and simulate as it was back in the 10,000, 12,000 BC, and it aligned perfectly with what the Egyptians wanted the pyramids to look like. So
Oh, that's
that
awesome.
is for me proof that they were built earlier than we think,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. So, I could have put any great point. Thank you, Fred. Thank you. No, I
Yep.
want to change the graphic now and put that pyramids 10,000 BC or whatever. But, there's points of reference here, right?
Yep.
Points of reference. And the reference point, and again, this is Einstein's theory of relativity. How do you capture
Yep.
BC, 10,000 years compared to
Right.
2 billion or 4 billion?
Exactly.
We're talking infinitesimal comparisons. So,
Yep.
fast forward, Jesus is born, and we've gone 2,000 years beyond that. So from Moses to now is only 3,500 years, whatever.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of time has passed relative to this. Okay.
No, and
So,
also
I,
the physical time of the physical universe versus the spiritual time.
okay.
Since
So,
we know from Emmanuel that the spirit that inhabited Jesus as we know it, the evolutions that he went through during his stage of human level that we find ourselves in today, the solar systems and the planets that he incarnated during those periods have already vanished in the dust
yes,
of time. Direct
yes,
quote from Emmanuel. I love that
yes,
quote.
yes. So, but again, I just try to comprehend the magnitude of what 10,000 years means, 1,000 years, 2,000 years compared to this. Okay. The evolution of the earth, the evolution of mankind. So here we are, 2022. What does it mean to you? How many years have you lived? How many years did you not live? And again, Spiritists will take these two questions and think of them in terms of multiple lives. So I'm going to let us do the mathematics. Did you know you have 86,000 seconds in a day? And we waste seconds without even thinking about it. So if you are 25 years old, you have lived 300 months, 15,000 plus weeks, 109,000 plus days, et cetera, leading to 1.3 billion seconds. Oh, there's billion. Okay. Now, again, in the reincarnation mindset, let's do some sample calculations. Let's assume that on average, we have lived 25 years on average throughout all of our incarnate lives. That means in the early stages of whenever it was we first appeared on this planet, whenever our spirit was inhabited in a human body, in whatever point BC or AD, when we lasted a short period of time, infant death was really common. I believe, there's all sorts of reasons that life expectancies were low 30s on average. So it certainly is the truth on the early years of America. Those that came over from Europe didn't last long. Those that came west repeatedly didn't last long. Lots of hard living that got in the way of being able to last a long time. So again, let's say on average, 25 years. And let's say, again, for number's sake, let's say then you waited 75 years. Then God decided you have 75 years in between your next incarnation. So that means you reincarnated every 100 years. Over 2 billion years, that means you reincarnated up to 20 million times. Wait a minute. That's a little impractical to think that I've come back that many times, or any of us have. We're not, maybe we are that hard headed. I don't know. But let's be conservative. Let's say that Mark's spirit has only reincarnated 1,000 times. and on that average of 25-year durations. That means I lived a total of 25,000 years. And I was dead for centuries at a time. Okay, now that's an important topic we're going to come back to in this presentation. But how do we feel with 1,000 lifetimes and 25,000 years of living? How have we progressed? How much have we progressed? Does that change our perspective of time, especially relative to this lifetime? Now, what did we do between each incarnation? Because you can delay, but time will not. Coming back to the topic of the lives of others compared to our own. Again, if you think of these dots as multiple incarnations, or all the people we've met in this lifetime or in all the lifetimes, so a large volume cumulatively. Now, I want to improve on this slide, but I want you to see this bottom part in red. Now, help me as we read this set of statements again. My life through multiple incarnations continues on its journey through all aspects of time. My individual lifetime on Earth contains the knowledge, experiences, thoughts, and feelings captured previously in their own time capsule, each one of those gold dots. Cumulatively, my knowledge, experiences, thoughts, and feelings through all those lifetimes combine to enable me to progress towards a higher spirit level. Our progress includes the involvements of others who have their own individual cycles. So we're going to try to mix all this up. Multiple times we've lived and died. When were we alive? Where were we? Who else did we know? What have we done or learned? How do we progress? Well, you know what? We're not supposed to know that. Spiritism teaches us we're not supposed to know that. There are exceptions. There are people that can go back into prior lives and know some things, know a lot of things.
We're not supposed to know yet, given our current state of evolution, but in the future, as we progress more, we will, right?
I was just going to say that because I do believe this becomes individual, and the vast majority of us could not handle knowledge, that kind of knowledge. Now, as we were living all these lives, we intermixed with many different people, many different spirits, influencing us, impacting us, etc. But I wonder, is there a common thread that persists through all those multiple lifetimes? And of course, we know about the principle of affinity and why individuals continually see each other. I want you to go with me on a mythical journey, a possible spiritual journey for some person. Let's consider it to be a male. And that in 1243 BC, and there could have been lifetimes before this, he was around at the time of Moses. He also was around in 827 BC when the king of Egypt died. He was also around in 203 BC when they did the armistice between Carthage and Rome and stopped a 27-year war. He was around when Jesus was around, because after Jesus baptized John the Baptist, he was there. In a future life, he went to the Council of Arabia representing Catholics. He was at the Battle of Nineveh. He was on the Second Crusade. He was on one of Columbus's ships. He was in the American Revolutionary War. He was one of Kardec's students. I'll come back to that. And then he comes back not too many years later as the Ku Klux Klan begins. And later on, in the time of Vietnam in the US, sending its first batch of troops in the 60s. And a whole bunch of other things were happening in America in the 60s. Now we'll come back to this as I give you more substance behind what a sample life might look like. Every one of us is unique, and therefore our life cycles are unique. Nobody has the same past lives and quantity or quality of completed cycles. Nobody has the same interim states. What happened in between incarnated lives? Nobody has the same current life, and nobody will have the same future life. But isn't it interesting that there's something that ties it all together? Okay, so I'm going to put some names to the graphics. Think of 8 independent infinite circles. These are members of my Spiritist group in the US. 8 individual infinite circles with 8 individual sets of prior lifetimes, experiences, knowledge. And guess what? We're all part of the same Spiritist Center. We are completely intersected. Our energies are exchanged routinely in some pretty interesting ways, actually. But the point of this is there's definitely intersection and interaction in our cycles. Now, what we know is these cycles won't last forever. These cycles continue to morph on their own. They ebb and flow. They go high and low with energies. They change substance. And a whole variety of things can happen. Sometimes simpatico. And I'm not just talking about romantic simpatico. I'm talking about people who become best of friends. This is me and Fred. We just connected on so many different wavelengths. It's amazing. And continue to. Who knows how long it will last? But affinities, harmonic resonance, and commonalities, shared energies, common thoughts and experiences, etc., etc. Hi, Roger. Well, again, our independent, individual, infinite circles will change over time. And sometimes the harmony and synchronization continues forever as a lifetime is concerned. And sometimes it morphs and differentiation begins. Now, there can also be death. Death of the relationship, death of the physical body. These infinite cycles will morph no matter what. While they're still living, there can be individuality, independence, and potentially detachment. Two people decide to part, or one person says, "That's it, I'm done." Or whatever, I'm going a different direction. Sometimes we handle it fine, sometimes we don't. Sometimes not handling it is a short-term reality, sometimes it's not. But notice the word time keeps appearing. This variable that is undefined, unexpected, unable to be predicted, because over time, things change. Oftentimes, right before our eyes, right under our nose, right down our gullet, and we haven't a clue until it comes out the other end. Pardon me for the graphics. Let's talk about free will, because this is the ultimate factor in the harmonic resonance between 2 or more infinite circles. We have to exercise our free will appropriately. And when we don't, for whatever reason or rationale, we're going to interrupt energetic synchronization. And sometimes it can get pretty difficult. All about freedom. Freedom of will, freedom to be independent, freedom whatever. Now, let's take that to the extreme, because when death occurs, if this is suicidal death that has occurred, thinking they have exercised their free will, they have ended their freedom. There's a ton of unfinished business that should have occurred in that life that now becomes another dot in the infinite circle. Unfinished business. Think about all those lifetimes you've led. Think about a separate set of dots of unfinished business.
I would like to even offer this thought, which I'm not sure if you're going to cover, Mark, but it has been on my mind ever since you started this. What about the simultaneous interactions that we are involved in through our thoughts that are affecting not only our present life, but also the past ones?
So, one of the characteristics of time is a man made measurement, minutes,
Hmm.
seconds, etc. Energy is calculated based on frequencies. Man made calculations based on seconds. How many blips per second when it resonates at a high pitch compared to a low pitch? And what we have are plenty of scientific studies that show emotions in a broad spectrum of low frequency and high frequency. So when you start to distort time, you are distorting the frequencies. When you start to distort the frequencies, you are distorting time. That's a personal opinion gleaned from I don't know how many downloads. you know, as I put this presentation together over the last year and a half. Okay, I have been kind of neglecting these wonderful isms that have been appearing throughout this presentation, but here's one that really sings to me. Time is what we want most, but what we use worst. And we know that procrastination is the thief of time. In this life, what have you done? What haven't you done? And remember, we talked about this journey? This is mythical. I made this up. I just pulled data and oops, I forgot to do something here. Let me go back. There we go. Okay. So in 1243, he was a slave during the time of Moses. We know from reading the Bible what slave life was like in general. We've seen the movies. Okay. Fast forward 400 years, give or take, and he is now comes back and grows up to be a personal servant to the king of Egypt when the king dies. What an interesting set of lessons he learned. He passes away eventually, who knows what his life is like, and he comes back and grows up to be a slave master during the Carthage and Rome armistice, which included Rome taking possession of all of Carthage's slaves. In 29 AD, Jesus baptized John the Baptist, and one of his first was this person who became a disciple. Now, in those 4 lifetimes, you start looking for what the heck is the common thread. I can see 2 of them, slave, but now go spiritual. Let's go on. For the Council of Arabia, the Catholics made him a key negotiator. Ooh. How do you create religious opposition based philosophies to be tolerant of each other? Both the Catholics and the Arabs hated each other. At the time, they actually had edicts to destroy on sight. And so the Catholics approached with, let's make peace. This is not what we're supposed to do. And they sent negotiators from both sides, and they pulled together some kind of an agreement, and it's in the history books. He passes away. He comes back years later, centuries later, as a warrior, grows up to be a warrior at the Battle of Nineveh. Staying in the religious environment, that's obvious, because he comes back 500 years later and is a military leader in the Christian Crusade second version. Brutal. History says perhaps the most brutal. the most senseless. 1492, he's a slave master for one of the boats that Columbus brings to the New World. Back being a slave master. Now I begin to think, well, what hasn't he learned yet? Here he was in these conflict and negotiation environments, leadership role, but something about slave here he hasn't quite learned, and he keeps being brought back. Goes on to be in the American Revolutionary War, but doesn't see action. He's a military guard in Washington, D.C. and goes to school to learn how to be a guard and applies that educational mindset in a very short period of time later when he becomes a student of Kardec's. He's one of the two students who Kardec shared his material with. He was an older student. Dies and comes back really quickly when the Ku Klux Klan is just beginning, and he's a white racist in the South. Okay, well, now we're back to this racial reality of slave master, black versus white, etc. And then in the early 60s in Oakland, California, as part of a Vietnam protest, he organizes a bunch of black guys. And Huey Newton created the Black Panthers, which brought racial awareness to all of California, because they almost became the equivalent of a union. There were chapters like there were Hells Angels chapters. There's chapters in every major city during the 60s. And it's all self-protection. He's a black activist. He's organizing people to take care of themselves and resist. What an amazing path this person had during his multiple incarnations. We can begin, and again, this is fantasy. This is just me in my head kind of putting things together based on how I went through a historical perspective of what was happening at various times of the year, of the century. And again, this is just a snapshot. These are just some of the golden dots. So our infinite cycles, we must have faith, and we must have patience. For what will be when it's meant to be, how it's meant to be, eventually. In the meantime, we got to keep progressing in faith. Do the right thing, do the good. Here's one of my favorite I captured during putting this presentation together. Time is slow when you wait. Time is fast when you are late. Time is deadly when you are sad. Time is short when you are happy. Time is endless when you are in pain, and time is long when you feel bored. Those are all emotions. Every time is determined by your feelings and your psychological conditions, not by clocks. Have a good time, always. Put yourself in a good time mindset, always. Changes everything. If you take anything, take that.
Love it. And it's all about our perception of time, right?
And it's so individual. To some, time is their driver. Every single minute of their waking life, and even sleeping life, time is their driver. You live by calendars. We live by time. So that's a societal type of evolution, if you will. But what does that really mean?
Yeah, and also we learn and understand in Spiritism that as we progress spiritually, we are able to be in multiple places at the same time. So that changes our whole understanding about time and place, because Just like the rays of the sun are simultaneously shining on the atmosphere of Jupiter, Mars, Pluto, Venus, but it's not many different suns, it's the same sun. Imagine us doing that right now in our current stage of evolution, as we are feeding energy and thoughts into ideas that are in embryonic stage of development in some frequency, but there is some kind of life there, while at the same time this life that you and I are linearly experiencing in this three-dimensional reality, right?
Correct. Correct.
I wonder then our perception of time, how it's going to be once we are able to be in the same time, quote unquote, in six different places, acting and influencing and interacting in different in loops like you showed. How are we going to be able to process that, right?
Well, I think the how is best answered like many unanswerable questions. When we are meant to know, we'll be able
Yeah.
to answer that question.
Yep.
Because right now, it is impossible to conceive that a human could do that. Two
And yet
places.
we do that, but and yet we do that,
Well,
right?
well, we know through mediumship about thought transference. We know about energy and point to point energy versus, for lack of a better phrase, shotgun energy or any direction energy,
Hmm.
type of sunburst energy that just goes in all directions type of thing. Um, I'm not nearly practiced enough nor learned enough to be able to explain it any further than that. But as you said, there are those that can and exhibit easily that ability. Okay, how that's done, like I said, they've obviously achieved a point where they were meant to acquire the ability, the knowledge, and utilize it appropriately. And I
I
firmly
think
believe a lot of it has to do with purpose. You cannot
sure.
be motivated by anything other than the purest of intentions.
I absolutely. When you get to that level where you're consciously cooperating with with the laws of the universe and you are therefore able to be in multiple places at the same time consciously, you've achieved a higher level of evolution. I think though that in our stage of evolution, the vast majority of us are already doing this unconsciously in our thought patterns. That, for example, like I have this obsessive idea about somebody. I can't get them out of my head. I'm physically here, but they're on the other side of the world and I can't stop thinking of them. Guess what? They're somehow becoming entangled with my energy because I am trying to be there as I am here at the same time, right?
Believe it or not, I know exactly what you mean. I have
Right?
experienced that. Um, and I would take it a step further that when I was on the other side of the world, so to speak, not only couldn't I get her thought out of my head, her image, her thoughts, but I knew I was in her head too. I knew in those moments I was in her head too. And it was confirmed later when she said, "Would
Yep.
you stop?"
There it is.
Okay.
So, like the idea of the Our Father prayer, when Christ teaches us to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, has a deeper meaning instead of the word forgiveness to also mean disconnect us from our trespasses as we disconnect those who trespass against us, so that we are not literally entangled with them at the same time that we're trying to be in this body, in with our senses present here, with our energy here, right?
In my limited time in Spiritist studies, I did learn that the phrase cutting the cords is the detachment element. And
There it is. Yeah.
the self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-analysis of how many of us have cords that are
Hmm.
easiest to cut. you know and of course, as spiritists, we know that's a path for difficulty at the time of transition. Now, to be perfectly candid, Fred, at your
Hmm.
age, I don't know how much concern that is for you, but at my age, that's a huge concern.
Why?
Well, because I don't expect to live as long as you. I've only got a limited number of years left, probably, to cut those cords. and you know,
Yes.
and, and I again, this um, the phrase is a little misleading, uh, in the sense of the chords are not all equal. The chords
No,
are
they're not.
distinctly unique, and while it may be possible to take an entire quantity of them in one fell swoop and eliminate them, you can't do that with everyone.
Yeah,
You know,
it is
but
true.
again, the goal is to minimize and minimize, in essence, the density of the chord
Yeah,
and
yeah. and
the
and I think
volume.
it's a two-step process, or rather it's two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is, once I'm able to achieve an inner peace in the forgiveness process of somebody else, that's half the battle in me unplugging. Christ is very emphatic about saying, if you know somebody has something against you, put down your offering and go to them very proactively to seek a reconciliation, right? Yes. And if I'm able to make that trek with my heart already disconnected from the offense, I think that's half the battle, because what the person is going to do upon arriving there, in my wanting to reconcile with them, has absolutely nothing to do with my ability or will or control, right?
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
And you see all this music around me. I'm,
Yes.
like you, a lifetime musician, but more importantly, in my spiritual journey, I've really begun to understand better the importance of understanding frequencies and energies and the like. You know, the destructive elements that are everywhere around us. Just learning about those and avoiding them has made a tremendous difference. And, there are some, but that's a whole presentation by itself. But I do want to make reference to one thing that is more scientific in nature, and that is that chart that shows the emotional spectrum. And when you look at the low end of that emotional spectrum and the damage it is doing to the human existence, what you realize is those bottom 4, 5 tied directly to forgiveness.
Yep.
And so,
And how funny that the figure of speech was taken literally when Christ was using the word eternity in
yes,
damnation, because the perception of time when we are in those frequencies is so long, because it's just a
you
perception,
know,
right?
not everybody handles grief the same, as nobody handles
Mm,
everything the same, but
right.
grief is the easiest one to grasp, that nobody handles it the same. So,
Yeah.
how much, here we are with time, how much time elapses in the grieving period? Well, of course, that's very individual.
Yep.
But, for some individuals, it never ends.
Yeah. And part of the process here is there are entanglements that we come with that are connected to our lineage, our ancestors. And of course, we understand in Spiritism that those are not randomly assigned by chance. We share a karmic past, we share affinities and characteristics that are perfectly suited for us to succeed in our commitments that we've agreed to undertake prior to reincarnating in this physical body we find ourselves in today, right?
Correct.
And what I'm discovering as I've studied Spiritism and I'm studying Spiritism, but now as I'm also studying family constellations and systems, is that we are able to disentangle simultaneously things within ourselves. And as we do that, it immediately reverberates in our entire ancestral lineage. And wherever those spirits or energies are in space and time, they will feel something. They don't have to physically manifest in a session or a workshop but energetically, it will reverberate. So that's where I go back with the notion of time. If I lived, if my if my great 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 grandfather was actually me reincarnated back there, and in this lifetime I'm able to get to an insight and I'm able to make a movement in my soul that disentangles me from some inherited trauma. And the moment that I'm able to get to that insight, I cause an energetic reverberation that reverberates back into my ancestral lineage. Then, do I somehow influence my great great grandfather's lifetime? And that's the question that when I ask, my brain just goes, I don't know the answer.
Well, there's a number of different Hollywood scripts that have been written on that premise of being able to change history and
Like
therefore
Batman,
alter the
right?
present. And as far as I know, they're just Hollywood scripts because we still haven't figured out the time continuum, no matter what Back to the Future showed us.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the movie Cloud Atlas, which I put here with
Yeah,
Tom Hanks and Halle
yeah.
Berry, is fantastic to know
Now,
you can
that is not
influence a.
to say that thought can transcend time.
It
I,
does,
be-
right?
I believe thought can transcend time.
Because it has to, because our notion of time and space, energy, mass are constructs of a physical universe. And in Spiritism, we study that there is God, the intelligent principle, and the universal cosmic fluid, which is everything else. But the spirit is not necessarily, the spirit is timeless, or it's in a different time, I guess, if you want to use the same word, right?
Okay, again, if you use the artistic perspective that I chose, that symbol for affinity, that's you forever. That's you from concept to reality. Okay, that's you from beginning to end, the end being this nanosecond. You know, everything is current right there. And how, where the current life fits in that artistic element, I don't know if it's in the center or if it's outside. I don't know. I didn't try to figure that one out, but I know the history is really well represented in that graphic.
Yeah.
You know,
How
it's an
much
easy
of the
concept to grasp.
how much of the negotiator from the Arab Catholic days is vibrating in me right now as I make a decision of what I choose to have for lunch,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you know, that that proposed journey, that lifetime journey, that was that was this moment driving through the desert by myself
Wow.
with the radio off, and all of a sudden this dot started to appear in my head, and it had years in it, and I thought to
Love
myself,
it.
Okay, I got the message. Thank you very much. It was so, it wasn't
Fantastic.
me. It wasn't me. I just put some Mark's imagination to it. That's all.
I love it. And we're going to have a presentation that you prepared for us soon, Mark, which is on music, right? Music and
Yeah.
spirituality. Tell,
I,
tell us a little bit about that so that I can put the link in the video in the description below for people to click through after they watch this, please.
in the aftermath of the pandemic in 2020, as many spiritist centers were still figuring out how to not have in-person meetings and do things, virtually online. My spiritist center had already figured it out. We were rocking and rolling. We were doing all kinds of things, and we had our own almost daily schedule of events online. And there was nothing on Fridays. And I said, well, I could do something on Fridays. And I put together this 10 part series on music and spirituality. It was so much fun. Again, nothing but downloads while driving through the desert. I swear,
Wow.
I'd land and set in North Las Vegas in my condo, and I'd go right to my computer and I'd start building the slides that had just been given to me.
Love it.
So the first one introduces vibrations and the importance of vibrations and the impact of vibrations. And
Okay.
then the second one, which I'm about to record for you, is the continuation of vibrations in terms of emotions.
Mm.
So imagine, if you will, the broad range of emotions from hearing Beethoven's Fifth or Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, some famous piece of symphonic music, to bagpipes, to
Hmm.
screaming heavy metal, to jazz. So each of those vibrations, each of those frequencies rubs us one way or another. It's all individual, and we're going to
True.
hear more about what that means, kind of from a science perspective and from a conclusive perspective of who we are as humans and how we come to conclusions. If you think about it, how many, here's my time question. How much time does it take when you hear a song, a piece of music for the first time? How much time does it take for you to know, I want to hear more or not?
Oh, it's very quick.
It's incredibly quick. How judgmental we humans are, almost instinctively.
Yep.
Almost instinctively. Like I said, if you start hearing bagpipes, you better like bagpipes.
Yep.
you know?
Yep. And how does it affect our emotions, right?
Well, okay, so now I start pulling from the masters, and I use Peter and the Wolf on my fourth chapter or fifth chapter or something like that. So here's the instruments of the orchestra representing animals. So here's
Yep.
the bassoon that represents one animal, and here's a piccolo that represents a bird, and here's the bassoon. The bassoon represented a duck, and so the way the music was written, the way, have you ever heard Peter and the Wolf?
Yeah. I've
Oh,
played it in orchestra twice.
too famous a piece of music, right? But again, it's the concept of how the imagination works. And
Yeah.
children devour that. Their
Yep.
brain is not unfettered. Adults can struggle to
Yeah.
appreciate something as innovative as, a piccolo making it sound like a bird. You can just envision the bird hopping on the line, hopping in the tree. Anyway, so that's what my music
Beautiful, my
search.
friend.
This goes a variety of different directions, and I got a little bit of live music. And oh, by the way, there's a wonderful place for you to contribute with your violin or keyboard, piano, if you choose. Uh,
Yes, I want to.
yes, because I have it's either 9 or 10, but it's towards the end of this whole series. I start talking about improvisation. And I
Ooh,
want to write a song on the fly.
I love
Totally
it.
cool.
You should totally do that, and I
I
will
know.
totally improvise on top of it, and we'll create something new. Love it.
I know. I know. So, that's energetic syncopation right there.
Beautiful. Oh, my friend, I loved our conversation about time, but sadly, our time is up.
Yes, it is.
But thank you so much for sharing this. I love it. Friends, if you have any questions for Mark or comments, please drop them below. We're going to continue these explorations on music spirituality with Mark channel, and send us your suggestions of guests and topics that you'd like to hear about here on the fire. We had a recent conversation with Emma Bragdon on psychedelics, which I learned so much. And if you haven't seen that yet, check it out. She gave me so many resources after we went off the air that I'm still reading today, and it made me feel really optimistic about where we're headed in our paradigm of mental health treatment. So, all right, my friend, I will bid you adieu. I hope to see you soon. And everybody here that has been watching with us, thank you so much for being together on Around the Fire on another episode of Spirit Reflections. And we'll hope to see you in the future episode. Bye-bye.